Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. When a hungry, abandoned child knocks on a stranger's door, most people would offer a sandwich and send her away. But when 8-year-old Maya approaches the grand estate of Samuel Hartwell, a wealthy cattle rancher in rural Texas, something extraordinary happens. Instead of giving her leftovers from his lavish dinner party, he does something that shocks his guests and transforms both lives forever. He pulls out a chair and invites her to sit at his table. What follows is a story of unexpected grace, where a moment of human decency creates a family bond that defies expectation. But will this act of kindness be enough to heal the wounds of a child who has lost everything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Hartwell estate sprawled across 3,000 acres of Texas hill country, where mesquite trees dotted rolling pastures, and the evening sky painted itself in shades of amber and rose. Samuel Hartwell stood on his wraparound porch, watching the last of the day's light settle over his land, a glass of bourbon warming in his weathered hands. At 58, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built something lasting. Yet tonight, surrounded by the laughter and conversation of his dinner guests, he felt more alone than he had in years. The dinner party had been Margaret Sinclair's idea, of course. As president of the Millfield County Historical Society and Samuel's closest neighbor, she had appointed herself the unofficial guardian of his social life since his wife Catherine's death 5 years ago. Tonight's gathering brought together the usual suspects: the mayor, the bank president, 2 prominent attorneys, and several ranch owners whose properties bordered his own. They were good people, Samuel reflected, but their conversations felt increasingly hollow, centered around golf handicaps, stock portfolios, and county politics that seemed to matter less with each passing year. Inside the dining room, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over a mahogany table that could seat 16, but tonight hosted only 8. Mrs. Rodriguez, his housekeeper of 15 years, moved efficiently between the kitchen and dining room, serving the kind of meal that would have made his late wife proud. Prime rib, twice-baked potatoes, fresh vegetables from the garden Catherine had planted but never lived to see fully mature. The irony wasn't lost on Samuel. He had everything a man could want, yet found himself longing for something he couldn't quite name. After dinner, Samuel excused himself and retreated to his study, a sanctuary filled with leather-bound books and the accumulated memories of 3 generations of Hartwells. On his desk sat his father's worn leather journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with the careful handwriting of a man who had believed deeply in the responsibilities that came with prosperity. Thomas Hartwell had built this ranch from nothing, guided by principles that seemed almost quaint in today's world. Treat your workers fairly, care for your land, and remember that wealth was meant to serve something greater than itself. Samuel opened the journal to a passage he had read countless times. A man's true worth isn't measured by what he accumulates, but by what he gives away freely. The land will outlast us all, but the kindness we show echoes through generations. His father had written those words during the Great Depression, when the ranch had served as an unofficial refuge for families traveling west in search of work. Thomas Hartwell had never turned anyone away hungry. Outside, beyond the manicured gardens and wrought-iron gates that marked the boundary of his property, 8-year-old Maya crouched behind a cluster of prickly pear cactus, her empty stomach cramping with hunger. She had been watching the big house for 3 days now, studying the patterns of the people who lived there, gathering courage for what she knew she had to do. The warm glow spilling from the windows seemed like something from a fairy tale. Too perfect and too distant for someone like her. Maya's world had collapsed 6 months ago when her grandmother, the only family she had left, died quietly in her sleep. Since then, she had moved from one temporary shelter to another, a church basement here, a distant relative's couch there, until she found herself completely alone on the streets of Millfield. She had learned to move quietly, to make herself invisible, to survive on scraps and the occasional kindness of strangers who took pity on a small girl with large, serious eyes. Her clothes, once bright and cheerful, now hung loose on her slight frame, faded from too many washings in public restrooms and creek beds. Her shoes, hand-me-downs from a church charity box, had holes that let in the Texas heat during the day and the surprising chill of desert nights. But it was the hunger that defined her existence now, a constant, gnawing presence that made it hard to think about anything else. She had tried the back doors of restaurants, the kindness of church ladies, even the desperate measure of searching through dumpsters. But tonight, watching the elegant party through the windows, seeing the abundance of food that would likely go to waste, Maya made a decision that terrified and excited her in equal measure. She would knock on the front door and ask for help. The contrast between her world and theirs couldn't have been starker. While she counted every bite as precious, they sat around that long table, glasses full of wine that probably cost more than she had seen in her entire life, discussing matters that seemed impossibly removed from the reality of sleeping in abandoned buildings and rationing day-old bread. Yet something about the house itself drew her. Perhaps it was the way the light seemed to embrace rather than exclude, or the gardens that spoke of care and attention rather than mere display. Samuel returned to his guests, but found himself distracted by a restlessness he couldn't quite explain. Margaret was holding court at one end of the table, regaling the group with stories about the upcoming charity auction, while Mayor Patterson debated cattle prices with Jim Bradley, whose ranch bordered Samuel's to the east. The conversation flowed around him like water around a stone, familiar and comfortable but somehow unable to reach him. "You're awfully quiet tonight, Sam," observed Dr. Helen Morrison, the county's only pediatrician and one of the few people present whose work brought her into contact with the less privileged residents of their community. She had known Samuel since childhood and possessed the rare gift of seeing through social pleasantries. "Just thinking about Dad's old journal," Samuel replied, swirling the bourbon in his glass. "He wrote about responsibility, how blessed folks ought to look after those who aren't so fortunate." "Your father was a good man," Dr. Morrison nodded approvingly. "We could use more people thinking along those lines these days. You know, I see children in my practice who don't get enough to eat, who don't have stable homes. It breaks my heart." Margaret Sinclair looked up from her conversation, catching the tail end of their exchange. "Oh, Helen, you're not going to start in on that again, are you?" "We all do our part. The church runs a food pantry. We have the annual toy drive, the scholarship fund. What more can we do?" "Sometimes I wonder if we're doing enough," Samuel said quietly, surprising himself with the admission. "Dad used to say that charity at arm's length isn't really charity at all." The comment hung in the air for a moment, creating a brief lull in the otherwise animated conversation. Samuel sensed he had touched on something his guests would rather avoid, the uncomfortable reality that existed beyond their comfortable lives, the poverty and desperation that persisted despite their charitable gestures. "Sam's always been too soft-hearted," Margaret said with a patronizing smile. "Remember when he wanted to turn the old bunkhouse into some kind of halfway house? Thank goodness Catherine talked sense into him." The mention of his late wife stung more than Samuel expected. Catherine had been practical, it was true, but she had also been kind. He wondered sometimes what she would think of the man he had become since her death. Successful, respected, but somehow diminished, as if her passing had taken away not just his companion, but his connection to something essential about himself. As the evening wore on, Samuel found his attention drifting to the windows, drawn by an inexplicable sense that something waited for him in the darkness beyond. The feeling was so strong that he excused himself twice to step onto the porch, breathing in the cool night air and listening to the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the mesquite trees. Each time he saw nothing but shadows and starlight, yet the feeling persisted. Maya, hidden in her patch of darkness, watched him during those moments when he stood alone on the porch. There was something in his posture, a quality of solitude that she recognized from her own experience. Perhaps, she thought, loneliness looked the same, whether you lived in a mansion or slept under bridges. The thought gave her courage, though she couldn't yet bring herself to step into the light. The knock came at 9:10, soft and tentative, almost lost beneath the sounds of conversation and clinking glasses. Mrs. Rodriguez paused in clearing the dessert plates, her head tilted toward the front door with a puzzled expression. Guests rarely arrived unannounced at the Hartwell estate. "And never this late in the evening, I'll get it," Samuel said, rising from his chair as Margaret launched into another story about the Historical Society's upcoming fundraiser. He expected to find a ranch hand with an emergency, or perhaps a neighbor with cattle that had wandered onto his property. Instead, when he opened the heavy oak door, he found himself looking down at a small girl whose large brown eyes held a mixture of desperation and determination that took his breath away. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had seen better days, her clothes clean but obviously worn and too large for her slight frame. "Excuse me." "Sir," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper but carefully polite, as if she had rehearsed the words 100 times. "I was wondering if you might have any leftover food you could spare. I haven't eaten today, and Her voice faltered as she looked past him into the warmth and light of the house, where she could see the elegant guests around the dining table. Samuel stared at her, momentarily speechless. In her small hand, she clutched a torn school photograph, a class picture that had been folded and refolded so many times that the creases had worn white. The sight of it, this tangible connection to a life that had been lost or left behind, struck him with unexpected force. "How long have you been outside?" he asked gently, kneeling to bring himself to her eye level. "A while," Maya admitted, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "I didn't want to interrupt your dinner party. I just thought maybe when you were finished." Behind him, Samuel could hear the conversation continuing, but it seemed to come from another world. Something in the child's dignity, the careful way she held herself despite her obvious need, reminded him of the stories his father had told about the families who had come to their door during the Depression. He thought of the journal entry he had read earlier about kindness echoing through generations. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maya," she said, then added quickly, "I'm not asking for charity, sir. I could work for it. I'm good at cleaning and I know how to feed chickens and—" "Maya," Samuel interrupted gently, "when was the last time you had a proper meal?" She considered this carefully, as if calculating. "Tuesday, I think. The church ladies gave me a sandwich. That had been 3 days ago." Samuel made a decision that surprised him even as he spoke the words. "Would you like to join us for dinner?" Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. "Sir? We're just finishing up, but there's plenty of food left. Mrs. Rodriguez always makes too much." He stood and stepped back, gesturing for her to come inside. "You shouldn't be out here alone at night." Maya hesitated on the threshold, clutching her torn photograph. "I'm not dressed properly for a dinner party." "You're dressed just fine," Samuel said firmly. "Come on in." As they walked toward the dining room, Samuel could feel his heart beating faster. He wasn't sure what had possessed him to invite this child into his home, into his carefully ordered world. But something about her quiet courage had made any other response impossible. The conversation at the dining table died abruptly as Samuel appeared in the doorway with Maya at his side. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward them, and Samuel saw the range of reactions play across his guests' faces: surprise, confusion, disapproval, and in Dr. Morrison's case, immediate concern. "Everyone," Samuel said calmly. "I'd like you to meet Maya. She's going to join us for dinner." Margaret Sinclair's fork clattered against her plate. "Samuel, what on earth?" "Mrs. Rodriguez," Samuel called toward the kitchen. "Could we set another place, please?" The housekeeper appeared in the doorway, took one look at Maya, and her expression softened immediately. "Of course, Mr. Samuel, right away." Samuel pulled out the empty chair next to his own. "Maya, please sit here." The child approached the table as if walking through a dream, her eyes wide as she took in the crystal glasses, the fine china, the abundance of food that still graced the table. She perched carefully on the edge of the chair, her small hands folded in her lap, the torn photograph still clutched between her fingers. "This is quite irregular, Samuel," Mayor Patterson said stiffly. "Perhaps the child should what?" Samuel asked, his voice carrying a quiet authority that silenced the table. "Should go hungry while we sit here discussing which wine pairs best with dessert?" Dr. Morrison leaned forward with professional interest. "Honey, are you all right? Are you hurt?" she asked Maya gently. Maya shook her head. "No, ma'am. I'm fine. Just hungry." Mrs. Rodriguez returned with a place setting and began loading Maya's plate with tender slices of prime rib, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread. Maya stared at the food as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. "Go ahead," Samuel encouraged. "Eat." Maya took a careful bite, then another, and Samuel watched as tears began to stream down her cheeks. She ate slowly, deliberately, savoring each morsel while trying to maintain her composure in front of the staring adults. "Where are your parents, dear?" asked Mrs. Henderson, the bank president's wife, her voice gentler than her husband's disapproving expression suggested. Maya swallowed carefully before answering. "My mama died when I was little. My grandmama took care of me, but she went to heaven 6 months ago." She touched the photograph gently. "This is from my class at school before." "Before what?" Dr. Morrison asked softly. "Before I had to leave. Before there was nobody left to take care of me." The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Samuel felt anger rising in his chest, not at Maya, but at a system that could allow a child to fall through the cracks so completely. "Where have you been staying?" he asked. Maya's shoulders lifted in a small shrug. "Different places. I try to stay out of people's way." "She's been living on the streets," Dr. Morrison said, her professional assessment cutting through any romantic notions the others might have harbored. "Look at her. She's malnourished, probably hasn't had proper shelter." "Well, surely there are agencies," Margaret said uncomfortably. "Social services, foster care. Sometimes the system fails children," Dr. Morrison replied bluntly. "Sometimes they fall through the cracks, especially if they're good at staying invisible," Maya continued eating. But Samuel could see she was listening to every word, her young face grave with understanding beyond her years. The torn photograph remained in her left hand, and he found himself wondering about the faces in that picture, the classmates and teacher who represented a life that seemed as distant as another country. "What's that you're holding?" he asked gently. Maya looked down at the photograph, then carefully unfolded it on the table. The image was faded and damaged, but it showed a classroom full of children, their teacher standing behind them. Maya pointed to a small figure in the front row. "That's me, from 2nd grade. Mrs. Patterson was the best teacher ever. She said I was real smart, that I could be anything I wanted when I grew up." Her voice carried a wistfulness that broke Samuel's heart. "I kept it so I wouldn't forget." "Forget what?" Samuel asked. "That I used to belong somewhere." The words hung in the air like a prayer, simple and devastating in their honesty. Samuel looked around the table at his guests. Good people, charitable people, who nonetheless seemed frozen by the enormity of what sat before them. Here was need in its purest form, a child who asked for nothing more than not to be forgotten, not to disappear entirely from the world. Samuel made his second impulsive decision of the evening. "Maya," he said, "how would you feel about staying here tonight? We have plenty of room, and it's not safe for you to be out there alone." Maya's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "You mean it?" "I mean it." Margaret Sinclair found her voice at last. "Samuel, you can't possibly be serious. You know nothing about this child. There are proper channels, procedures." "Right now," Samuel said firmly, "all I know is that she's 8 years old, she's hungry, and she's alone." "That's enough." Maya carefully folded her photograph and tucked it into her pocket, as if securing her most precious possession. When she looked up at Samuel, her eyes held something that had been missing before, the faintest glimmer of hope. The guest bedroom on the 2nd floor of the Hartwell house was larger than any room Maya had ever slept in, its cream-colored walls adorned with watercolor paintings of wildflowers and pastoral scenes. Mrs. Rodriguez had turned down the quilted bedspread and laid out a soft cotton nightgown that had belonged to Catherine Hartwell, too large for Maya's small frame but clean and warm. A small lamp cast gentle light across the room, creating shadows that were comforting rather than threatening. Maya sat on the edge of the bed, her bare feet not quite touching the hardwood floor, and carefully removed the small silver locket from around her neck. It was the only thing she owned that had belonged to her mother, a delicate piece of jewelry that held a tiny photograph of a young woman with Maya's same dark eyes and gentle smile. Her grandmother had given it to her on her 7th birthday, along with the story of how her mother had worn it every day until the cancer took her away. This was hers, Maya whispered to the empty room, opening the locket to look at the faded photograph inside. "Mama, I don't know if this is okay. I don't know if I'm supposed to be here." A soft knock on the door interrupted her whispered conversation. "Maya?" Samuel's voice came through the wood, uncertain and tentative. "Is everything all right in there?" "Yes, sir," she called back, quickly fastening the locket around her neck again. "May I come in for a moment?" Maya looked around the room, taking inventory of her few possessions, the torn school photograph now resting on the nightstand, her worn clothes folded neatly on the chair, the locket safely hidden beneath the nightgown. "Okay." Samuel entered carrying a glass of milk and a plate with 2 chocolate chip cookies. He looked as uncertain as Maya felt, a wealthy rancher who clearly had no experience with 8-year-old house guests. "I thought you might be hungry again," he said, setting the plate on the nightstand. "Mrs. Rodriguez made these this afternoon." "Thank you," Maya said politely, though she couldn't quite bring herself to reach for the cookies. In her experience, food was precious and not to be wasted. What if he'd changed his mind about letting her stay? Samuel noticed her hesitation and sat carefully in the chair by the window, maintaining what he hoped was a non-threatening distance. "Maya, I want you to know that you're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you or make you leave tonight. What about tomorrow?" The question slipped out before Maya could stop herself. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, and Maya could see him wrestling with something. Finally he said, "Let's worry about tomorrow when it comes. Tonight, you have a warm bed and enough food, and that's what matters. Your friends didn't like me being there." Maya observed with the uncomfortable perceptiveness of a child who had learned to read adult emotions for survival. "My friends," Samuel said carefully, "aren't used to unexpected guests. They'll come around." He wasn't sure he believed that himself, but he didn't want Maya to carry the burden of their disapproval. Maya reached for one of the cookies and took a small bite, her eyes closing briefly at the sweetness. "Mrs. Rodriguez is nice. She didn't look at me like I was dirty." "You're not dirty," Samuel said firmly. "You're a little girl who's been taking care of herself, and that takes more courage than most adults have." "My grandmama used to say that," Maya said softly. "She said I was brave like my mama." "Tell me about your grandmama." Maya's face lit up slightly. "She lived in a little house with a garden. She grew tomatoes and green beans, and she made the best cornbread in the world. She worked at the diner downtown until her hands got too shaky to carry the plates." Her expression grew sad. "She tried to keep taking care of me, but she got so tired all the time." "What happened after she died?" "Social services came, but they said all the foster homes were full. They put me with my cousin Leticia for a while, but she had 4 kids already, and not enough money for another mouth to feed. Then they said they'd find something more permanent, but—" Maya shrugged, the gesture carrying the weight of broken promises and failed systems. Samuel felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, the same helpless rage he'd experienced when watching Catherine waste away despite the best medical care money could buy. Some problems couldn't be solved with wealth or influence, but that didn't make them any less urgent. "How long have you been on your own?" "About 3 weeks, maybe more. The days kind of run together." 3 weeks. Samuel tried to imagine this small girl, alone on the streets, finding food and shelter wherever she could. The thought made his chest tight with emotions he couldn't quite name. "Maya, can I ask you something?" She nodded, finishing the first cookie and eyeing the second with obvious longing. "Why did you come here?" "To this house, I mean. There are other places you could have asked for help." Maya considered the question seriously, as if it mattered greatly that she give the right answer. "I watched you for a while before I got brave enough to knock. You came out on the porch by yourself sometimes, and you looked—" She paused, searching for the words. "You looked lonely too. I thought maybe you'd understand." The observation hit Samuel with unexpected force. "Out of the mouths of babes," his father used to say. This child had seen something in him that he'd barely acknowledged himself, a loneliness that wealth and social position couldn't touch. "Go ahead and have the other cookie," he said gently. Mrs. Rodriguez made them for eating, not looking at. Maya smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her, and reached for the second cookie. As she ate, Samuel found himself studying her face, noting the intelligence in her dark eyes, the careful way she moved that spoke of someone who had learned not to take up too much space in the world. "Mr. Samuel," she said after finishing the cookie and taking a sip of milk. "Just Samuel is fine. Samuel, are you going to call the social services people tomorrow?" The question he'd been dreading, asked with the directness that only children could manage. Samuel looked at this small girl who had somehow walked into his ordered life and turned it upside down in the span of a few hours. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "What would you want me to do?" Maya was quiet for so long that Samuel wondered if she'd fallen asleep with her eyes open. Finally she said, "I'd want to stay, but I know that's probably not how things work for people like me." "What do you mean, people like you?" "Kids with nowhere to go. Kids who don't belong anywhere." Samuel stood up and moved to the window, looking out over his vast property illuminated by moonlight. Behind him, he heard Maya settling under the covers, and when he turned around, she was curled up on her side, the silver locket visible at her throat. "Maya, yes, you belong here tonight, and that's enough for now." As he turned off the lamp and headed for the door, Maya's voice followed him into the hallway. "Samuel, thank you for the cookies, and for not making me eat alone." Downstairs, Mrs. Rodriguez was finishing the last of the dishes, her movements efficient despite the late hour. She looked up as Samuel entered the kitchen, her expression unreadable. "She's a good child," the housekeeper said without preamble. "Polite, grateful, but scared, Mr. Samuel, very scared. What do you think I should do, Elena?" Mrs. Rodriguez dried her hands on her apron and fixed him with the same look she'd given him when he was 12 and had broken her favorite. "A vase with a carelessly thrown baseball. I think you should ask yourself what Mr. Thomas would have done. Your father never turned away a child who needed help." Samuel nodded slowly. His father's journal was still open on his desk, the words about kindness echoing through generations, seeming prophetic now. "She'll need clothes," Mrs. Rodriguez continued practically. "And we should probably call Dr. Morrison to check her over. Lord knows what she's been through. You think she should stay?" The older woman's face softened. "Mr. Samuel, this house has been too quiet for too long. Maybe it's time it remembered what it was like to be a home." Maya woke before dawn to the sound of cattle lowing in the distance and the gentle movement of air through the open window. For a moment she lay perfectly still, afraid that opening her eyes would reveal the comfortable bedroom to be nothing more than a dream. But the soft cotton sheets were real beneath her fingers, and when she finally looked around, morning light was filtering through the curtains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. She dressed quickly in her worn clothes and crept downstairs, following the scent of coffee and bacon toward the kitchen. Mrs. Rodriguez was already at work, humming softly as she prepared breakfast, and she smiled when Maya appeared in the doorway. "Buenos dias, mija," the housekeeper said warmly. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, ma'am. Better than I have in a long time." Maya hesitated by the doorway. "Is it okay if I help with something?" "I don't want to be a bother." "You could never be a bother, child. Come, help me set the table." As they worked together, Maya found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't experienced in months. Mrs. Rodriguez moved with the comfortable efficiency of someone who had run this household for years, and her gentle questions about Maya's preferences, how she liked her eggs, whether she wanted orange juice or milk, made the child feel valued rather than tolerated. Samuel appeared just as they finished setting the table, his hair still damp from his shower and his clothes carrying the faint scent of soap and aftershave. He paused when he saw Maya arranging the silverware with careful precision. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "Yes, sir." "Thank you." Maya looked up at him with those serious dark eyes. "Would it be all right if I helped with the ranch work today? I learn fast, and I promise I won't get in the way." Samuel felt something shift in his chest at her earnest offer. "I think we can find something for you to do. But first, breakfast." They ate together at the kitchen table, a more intimate setting than the formal dining room where last night's drama had unfolded. Maya ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Samuel found himself stealing glances at her and marveling at how easily she seemed to fit into the morning routine. "Tell me," Samuel said as he finished his coffee, "have you ever been around horses?" Maya's eyes lit up, only from far away. "My grandmama used to take me to watch them in the pasture sometimes. She said they were God's most beautiful creatures. Would you like to meet some of ours?" The joy that transformed Maya's face was answer enough. An hour later, they stood at the fence of the main paddock, where 3 of Samuel's gentlest horses grazed in the morning sun. Maya gripped the wooden rail with both hands, her breath visible in small puffs in the cool air, watching the animals with rapt attention. "That's Buttercup," Samuel said, pointing to a golden Palomino mare. "She's 22 years old, and about as gentle as they come. Next to her is Thunder, though he's more like a gentle rumble these days. And the big bay is Major. He was my wife's favorite." "They're beautiful," Maya whispered. "Can I touch one?" Samuel opened the gate and led her slowly toward Buttercup, who raised her head with mild interest. "Hold your hand out flat like this, and let her smell you first." Maya extended her small hand with reverent care, and Buttercup lowered her massive head to investigate. When the horse's soft muzzle touched her palm, Maya gasped with delight. "She's so warm," Maya said, her voice filled with wonder. "And soft. Would you like to brush her?" For the next hour, Samuel taught Maya the basics of horse care, how to brush their coats, check their hooves, and read their body language. Maya absorbed every lesson with the intensity of someone who had learned that knowledge could mean survival. But there was joy in her concentration, too. A child's natural delight in new experiences. "You're a natural," Samuel observed as Maya carefully brushed Buttercup's neck. "Horses can sense when someone has a gentle spirit. My grandmama always said I was good with animals. She wanted to get me a puppy for my birthday, but—" Maya's voice trailed off, and Samuel saw the shadow that crossed her face. "Maybe we can think about that someday," he said carefully, not wanting to make promises he might not be able to keep. They were interrupted by the rumble of an approaching truck. Samuel looked up to see Jim Bradley's pickup coming up the drive, dust trailing behind it like a question mark. "Maya, why don't you stay here with Buttercup while I go see what Jim needs?" Samuel suggested. But he could see the anxiety that immediately tensed her small shoulders. Jim Bradley was a good neighbor, and generally a reasonable man. But Samuel could tell from his expression that this wasn't a social call. They met halfway between the paddock and the house, and close enough that Maya could see them, but hopefully far enough that she couldn't hear their conversation. "Morning, Jim," Samuel said evenly. "Sam." Jim touched the brim of his hat, but his expression remained serious. "I heard about last night. Margaret Sinclair's been calling half the county talking about how you've taken in some street kid." Samuel felt his jaw tighten. "Maya is a little girl who needed help. Look, I'm not saying you don't have a good heart, but people are talking. Wondering if you've thought this through. Nobody knows anything about this kid, where she came from, what kind of situation she might bring to your door. She's 8 years old, Jim. 8-year-olds can come with complications. Family members looking for money, social services breathing down your neck, liability issues if something happens to her while she's here." Samuel glanced back toward the paddock, where Maya was still brushing Buttercup, but obviously listening to their conversation. Even at this distance, he could see the tension in her small body. "What are you suggesting I do? Put her back on the street?" "I'm suggesting you call the proper authorities and let them handle it. That's what they're there for. The proper authorities failed her." "Jim, That's how she ended up sleeping rough in the first place. Jim Bradley shifted uncomfortably, clearly regretting his role as community messenger. Sam, I like you. We've been neighbors for 15 years. But people are worried about your judgment. Taking in a random kid without doing any background checks, without thinking about the legal implications. It's not like you. Maybe it should be. The words surprised Samuel, even as he spoke them. Jim's expression suggested they surprised him too. Just think about it, Jim said finally. That's all I'm asking. Think about what you're getting yourself into. After Jim left, Samuel walked slowly back to the paddock, where Maya was standing very still beside Buttercup, her small hand resting on the horse's neck as if drawing comfort from the contact. Are you going to send me away? She asked without looking at him. Samuel's heart clenched at the quiet resignation in her voice. Is that what you heard? Some of it. That man thinks you should call the authorities. Samuel leaned against the fence beside her, choosing his words carefully. Maya, there are going to be people who don't understand why I asked you to stay. They're going to have opinions about what's best for you, what's best for me. But the only opinions that matter are yours and mine. Maya finally looked up at him. What do you think is best? I think, Samuel said slowly, that you deserve a chance to be a kid. To go to school, to have friends, to not worry about where your next meal is coming from. And you think you can give me that? I'd like to try, if you'd like me to. Maya was quiet for a long moment, stroking Buttercup's neck with small, gentle movements. Finally she said, I've never had anyone want to take care of me who wasn't related to me. Does that scare you? A little. What if I'm not good enough? What if you change your mind? Samuel walked to his truck and returned, carrying a small object wrapped in an old cloth. Maya, I want to show you something. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a hand-carved wooden horse, its surface worn smooth from years of handling. The craftsmanship was exquisite despite its age, every detail lovingly rendered by skilled hands. My father made this for me when I was about your age, Samuel said, placing it carefully in Maya's hands. I was scared too about a lot of things. Scared I wasn't smart enough or strong enough or good enough to live up to his expectations. Maya turned the wooden horse over in her hands, marveling at its weight and the smoothness of the wood. What did he tell you? He told me that being good enough wasn't about being perfect. It was about being willing to try, to learn, to care about something bigger than yourself. Samuel paused, watching Maya's face as she examined the carving. I'd like you to keep that if you want to. Really? Maya's eyes were wide with disbelief. Really? And Maya, you're already good enough. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. As they walked back toward the house for lunch, Maya clutched the wooden horse in one hand and slipped her other hand into Samuel's. It was the first time she had voluntarily touched him, and the simple gesture filled him with a protective tenderness that surprised him with its intensity. Samuel, Maya said as they reached the porch. Yes? Thank you for letting me help with the horses. I felt useful. You are useful. And tomorrow, if you want, I'll teach you how to ride. The smile that lit up Maya's face was brighter than the Texas sun overhead. And Samuel found himself smiling back, despite the challenges he knew lay ahead. The legal guardianship papers lay spread across Samuel's desk like pieces of a complex puzzle, each form representing another hurdle in what he was beginning to realize would be a long and complicated process. Attorney Patricia Vance sat across from him, her expression professional but concerned as she reviewed the preliminary paperwork. Samuel, I have to be honest with you, Patricia said, removing her reading glasses and fixing him with a direct stare. This isn't going to be simple. The state has strict requirements for emergency guardianship, and they're going to want extensive background checks, home studies, financial documentation, the works. Whatever it takes, Samuel replied without hesitation. Maya needs stability, and I can provide that. It's not just about what you can provide. The court will want to explore every avenue for placing her with biological relatives first. If there are any family members who could potentially take her in, there aren't, Samuel said firmly. I've talked to Maya extensively about this. Her grandmother was her last relative who was willing and able to care for her. There's a cousin who had her briefly, but she made it clear that wasn't a viable long-term arrangement. Patricia made notes on her legal pad. Even so, the state will conduct their own family search. They're required to. She looked up at him seriously. Samuel, I've known you for 10 years, and I think what you're doing is admirable. But I need you to understand the scrutiny you're going to face. A wealthy, single man wanting to adopt an unrelated child, especially a child of a different race, is going to raise questions. Samuel felt a familiar anger stirring. What kind of questions? The kind you don't want to hear, but the kind that will be asked nonetheless. Your motivations will be examined under a microscope. Social workers will want to know why you haven't pursued adoption through traditional channels, why you've chosen to take in a child you found on your doorstep rather than going through an agency, because she needed help, because no one else was helping her. That's not how the system works, and you know it. There are protocols, procedures. The protocols failed her, Samuel interrupted. The procedures left her sleeping in abandoned buildings and scrounging for food. Patricia held up a hand. I'm not arguing with you. I'm telling you what you're up against. And it's not just the legal system you need to worry about. She was right, and Samuel knew it. The community pressure had been building steadily over the past 2 weeks, since Maya had come to stay. What had started as whispered conversations and sideways glances had escalated to more direct confrontations. 3 days ago, at the feed store, Samuel had overheard Tom Henderson telling a group of ranchers that Sam Hartwell's lost his damn mind, taking in some random kid like she's a stray dog. When Samuel had approached the group, the conversation had stopped abruptly. But the damage was done. The judgment was clear on every face. Margaret Sinclair had been even more direct, cornering him at the post office to express her concerns about his decision. Samuel, dear, I understand you're grieving, Catherine, but this isn't the way to fill that void. You're not thinking clearly. The assumption that his decision was driven by grief or loneliness rankled Samuel more than he cared to admit. Yes, he missed Catherine. Yes, the house had felt too empty for too long. But his choice to help Maya wasn't about filling a void. It was about doing what was right. There's something else, Patricia continued, consulting her notes. Social services has already been contacted. Samuel's head snapped up. By whom? The report was filed anonymously, but it alleges that you're keeping a minor without proper authorization and that the child's welfare may be at risk. At risk. Samuel's voice rose despite his effort to remain calm. She's eating regular meals, sleeping in a warm bed, getting medical care. I know that. You know that. But now we have to prove it to the state. They'll be sending a caseworker out for an initial assessment. Samuel stood and walked to the window, looking out over the pasture where Maya was feeding carrots to Buttercup under Mrs. Rodriguez's watchful eye. In the 2 weeks since she'd arrived, the transformation in the child had been remarkable. The hollow look had left her eyes, she'd gained weight, and her natural intelligence was beginning to shine through as she devoured the books Samuel had bought for her. But perhaps more importantly, Maya had begun to trust. She no longer flinched when he approached unexpectedly, no longer hoarded food in her room, no longer asked multiple times a day whether she could stay. She was beginning to act like a child rather than a survivor, and Samuel would be damned if he'd let bureaucratic red tape or community prejudice destroy that progress. When is the caseworker coming? He asked. Next Tuesday. Her name is Janet Williams, and from what I've heard, she's thorough but fair. The key is to be completely transparent. Don't try to present a perfect picture. Just show them the reality of Maya's life here. Samuel turned back to Patricia. What about school? I've been working with Maya on her reading and math, but she needs to be in a proper classroom with children her own age. That's complicated. To enroll her in school, you need legal guardianship or custody. Right now, you're essentially a legal stranger who happens to be caring for her. So what do? We file for emergency temporary guardianship. It's a stopgap measure that will give you some legal standing while we work through the full adoption process. But Samuel, I need you to understand, this could take months, maybe years, and there's no guarantee of success. The weight of what he was undertaking settled on Samuel's shoulders like a heavy coat. Months or years of legal battles, community scrutiny, and bureaucratic obstacles, all for the sake of a little girl who had already suffered more loss than any child should endure. "What does Maya say about all this?" Patricia asked gently. "I haven't told her about the legal complexities. She knows I want her to stay permanently, and she wants that too. But I don't want to get her hopes up if what?" Samuel returned to his chair, suddenly feeling older than his 58 years. "If I can't deliver on what I've promised her." Patricia leaned forward, her expression softening from professional to personal. "Samuel, I've watched you build this ranch from a struggling operation into one of the most successful in the county. I've seen you navigate business deals that would have broken lesser men. If anyone can see this through, it's you. This is different. This isn't about cattle prices or land deals. This is about a little girl's future. Yes, it is. And that little girl couldn't have found a better champion." After Patricia left, Samuel sat alone in his study, staring at the guardianship papers that represented both hope and uncertainty. He thought about the conversation he would need to have with Maya, about school, about the caseworker's visit, about the reality that their newfound family might face challenges neither of them had anticipated. A soft knock on the door interrupted his brooding. "Come in." Maya appeared in the doorway, still wearing the clothes that smelled of hay and horses, her face bright with the kind of contentment that comes from a day spent doing meaningful work. "Mrs. Rodriguez said dinner will be ready in 30 minutes. She's making enchiladas." Maya paused, studying his expression with the perceptiveness that never failed to surprise him. "Are you okay?" "You look worried." Samuel made a decision in that moment, not to burden Maya with the full complexity of their situation, but not to lie to her either. "I am a little worried," he admitted. "I've been talking to a lawyer about making our arrangement official, about adopting you properly, so you can go to school and we don't have to worry about anyone trying to separate us." Maya's eyes widened. "Adopt me? Like be my real dad, if that's what you want. But it's going to take some time, and there will be people who ask questions and want to make sure you're safe and happy here." Maya crossed the room and climbed onto the chair across from his desk, her legs swinging freely as she considered this information. "Will you tell them that I am safe and happy, I mean? I'll tell them the truth, that you're the bravest, smartest, most wonderful little girl I've ever known, and that I love you like you were my own daughter." The words were out before Samuel realized he'd spoken them. But as soon as they hung in the air between them, he knew they were absolutely true. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, this abandoned child had become his daughter in every way that mattered. Maya's response was to slip from her chair and come around the desk to hug him. A fierce, trusting embrace that told him everything he needed to know about her feelings on the matter. "I love you too," she whispered against his shoulder. "And I want to be your real daughter more than anything." As Samuel held her close, he felt his resolve strengthening. Whatever obstacles lay ahead, whatever scrutiny they would face, whatever battles he would have to fight, he would see this through. Maya deserved a family, and he was determined to give her one. Maya's first report card from Millfield Elementary lay on the kitchen table like a small miracle, its neat rows of letter grades telling a story that filled Samuel with fierce pride. After 6 weeks of homeschooling and tutoring to catch up on months of missed education, Maya had tested into 3rd grade and was not only keeping pace with her classmates, but excelling. "Look, Samuel." Maya burst through the kitchen door, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders and her face radiant with excitement. "Mrs. Patterson gave me an A on my book report, and Mr. Garcia said my math homework was perfect." Samuel examined the report card with the solemnity it deserved. Reading, A. Mathematics, A. Science, B+. Social Studies, A. Art, A+. The only lower grade was in physical education, and that was simply because Maya was still building up her stamina after months of poor nutrition. "Maya, this is outstanding," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your grandmama would be so proud." "Really?" Maya's eyes shone with the hunger for approval, that had become familiar to Samuel over their weeks together. Really, and I'm proud too. Prouder than I've ever been of anything. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been quietly preparing their afternoon snack, wiped her eyes with her apron. "Ay, mija, you are so smart. Like I always tell Mr. Samuel, this girl, she has a gift." The transformation in Maya had been remarkable to witness. With regular meals, stable sleep, and the security of knowing where she would wake up each morning, her natural intelligence had flourished. She devoured books with an appetite that rivaled her initial hunger for food, often reading late into the night by the lamp beside her bed. Her questions were endless and thoughtful, about the ranch, about the world beyond it, about how things worked and why people behaved the way they did. "Can we call Dr. Morrison and tell her?"
Maya asked.
She said she wanted to know how school was going. Dr. Helen Morrison had become an unexpected ally in their unconventional family formation. As the pediatrician who had examined Maya during her first week at the ranch, she had provided not only medical care, but also testimony to the state about Maya's improved health and emotional well-being. More than that, she had become a friend, someone who saw past the complexity of their situation to the simple truth of what was best for Maya. "She's actually coming for dinner tonight," Samuel said. "You can show her the report card then." Maya's face lit up even brighter. She had taken an immediate liking to Dr. Morrison, who treated her with the same respect she showed adult patients while still acknowledging her age and experience. The doctor had a gift for making Maya feel important without making her feel different, a quality that was rarer than Samuel had realized. The dinner invitation had been Samuel's idea, though he wasn't entirely sure of his own motivations. Helen Morrison was an attractive, intelligent woman whose company he genuinely enjoyed. She was also one of the few people in their community who had openly supported his decision to take Maya in. Whether there might be something more than friendship developing between them was a question Samuel wasn't ready to examine too closely. As evening approached, Maya helped Mrs. Rodriguez set the table in the dining room, the same room where she had first been invited to sit just weeks ago. The transformation in her confidence was evident in the way she moved through the house now, no longer asking permission for every action, no longer apologizing for taking up space. Dr. Morrison arrived precisely at 7, carrying a bottle of wine and a small wrapped package that she handed to Maya with a mysterious smile. "What's this for?" Maya asked, accepting the gift with the careful courtesy that had become second nature to her. "Open it and find out." Inside the wrapping was a small wooden box with Maya's name carved into the lid. When she opened it, she found a collection of colored pencils and a leather-bound sketchbook. "I noticed you like to draw during your checkups," Dr. Morrison explained. "I thought you might enjoy having some supplies of your own." Maya's response was immediate and heartfelt. She threw her arms around Dr. Morrison in an enthusiastic hug that made the doctor laugh with genuine delight. "Thank you, I love it. Look, I can draw Buttercup and Thunder and Major, and don't forget your wooden horse," Samuel added, referring to the carved toy that had become Maya's most treasured possession after the silver locket. Over dinner, Maya proudly displayed her report card, explaining each grade and telling stories about her teachers and classmates. Dr. Morrison listened with the kind of attention that made Maya glow with confidence, asking thoughtful questions and celebrating each achievement. "Mrs. Patterson says I'm reading at a 5th grade level now," Maya announced. "She thinks I might be able to skip 4th grade next year if I keep improving." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Dr. Morrison said. "But remember, there's no rush. Learning is about more than just moving ahead quickly." Samuel watched the interaction with growing warmth. Seeing Maya receive encouragement from another adult who clearly cared about her well-being felt like validation of the choice they had all made to become a family. After Maya went upstairs to start her homework, Samuel and Helen lingered over coffee on the front porch, the comfortable silence of old friends settling between them. "She's thriving," Helen said finally. "The change in her since that first night is remarkable. She's an amazing kid." Smart, resilient, kind. She just needed someone to believe in her. She needed you, Helen said simply. And you needed her too, though I suspect you're only beginning to realize that. Samuel considered this observation. My friends think I've lost my mind. Margaret Sinclair cornered me at the bank yesterday, lecturing me about inappropriate attachments and suggesting I see a grief counselor. Helen's expression darkened. Margaret Sinclair wouldn't recognize genuine love if it bit her on her perfectly powdered nose. What you and Maya have isn't inappropriate, it's beautiful. The legal process has been challenging. There are people who question my motives, who think a single man shouldn't be raising a young girl, especially one from a different background. Those people are idiots, Helen said with uncharacteristic bluntness. I see the way Maya looks at you, Samuel. I see how she talks about you, how secure she feels in your love. That child has found her home, and anyone who can't see that is willfully blind. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles. 2 cars pulling up the drive with their headlights cutting through the gathering darkness. Samuel frowned, recognizing Margaret Sinclair's silver Mercedes and the mayor's black Cadillac, expecting company. Helen asked. No, Samuel said grimly, rising from his chair as the uninvited guests approached the porch. Margaret Sinclair emerged from her car with the determined stride of someone on a mission, followed by Mayor Patterson and, to Samuel's surprise, Judge Harold Winters, the county's most senior magistrate. Samuel, Margaret said without preamble, we need to talk. It's a little late for social calls. Margaret, this isn't social, Judge Winters said gravely. Samuel, we're here as friends, people who care about you and your reputation in this community. Helen Morrison stood as well, and Samuel noticed how she positioned herself slightly in front of him, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of support. Evening, Helen. Mayor Patterson nodded. Perhaps this conversation would be better held privately. Dr. Morrison is a friend, Samuel said firmly. Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of her. Margaret's face flushed with indignation. Very well, Samuel. This situation with that child has gone too far. People are talking, and not kindly. Your reputation, your standing in the community. My reputation will survive, Samuel interrupted. Will it? Judge Winters asked seriously. Samuel, there are rumors circulating that I find deeply troubling. Suggestions about your motivations for taking in this girl. Speculation about your mental state since Catherine's death. Samuel felt his temper rising. What exactly are you suggesting, Harold? I'm suggesting that you're making a mistake that will follow you for the rest of your life. A wealthy, unmarried man taking in a young girl from the streets. Do you have any idea how that looks? It looks like kindness, Helen Morrison said sharply, stepping forward. It looks like a man doing what any decent person should do when they encounter a child in need. Dr. Morrison, Margaret said coldly, this doesn't concern you. It concerns me as Maya's physician, as someone who has witnessed firsthand the positive impact of Samuel's care on that child's physical and emotional health. The point is, Mayor Patterson interjected, trying to regain control of the conversation, that perception matters. Samuel, you're a respected member of this community, a successful businessman. This situation is damaging that reputation. Then maybe this community's perceptions need to change, Samuel said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. From the upstairs window, a small figure watched the confrontation below, her report card still clutched in her hand, the joy of the day curdling into familiar fear. Maya had heard enough raised voices and harsh words in her young life to recognize when the adults were fighting about her. The private investigator's file landed on Samuel's desk with the weight of revelation, its manila folder thick with documents that would change everything he thought he knew about Maya's past. Patricia Vance had hired the investigator as part of the routine background check required for the adoption proceedings, expecting to find confirmation of what Maya had already told them about her family history. Instead, they had uncovered a web of deceit and greed that left Samuel staring at the papers in stunned disbelief. You're going to want to sit down for this, Patricia said grimly. settling into the chair across from his desk. It was early morning, the sun barely above the horizon, and Maya was still asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware that her world was about to shift once again. Samuel remained standing, his hands pressed flat against the desk as he studied the birth certificate that bore Maya's full name. Maya Elena Vasquez Morrison. The surname Morrison hit him like a physical blow. Morrison, he said slowly. As in, Roberto Morrison, yes. Your former business partner. Maya is his granddaughter. Samuel sank into his chair, the implications washing over him in waves. Roberto Morrison had been more than a business partner. He had been Samuel's closest friend, the man who had helped him build his ranch into what it was today. Roberto's sudden death in a car accident 3 years ago had been devastating, both personally and professionally. But Roberto had never mentioned having a granddaughter. There's more, Patricia continued, opening the file to reveal a series of legal documents. Maya's mother, Elena Morrison Vasquez, was Roberto's daughter from his first marriage. She died of cancer when Maya was 4, just as Maya told us. But here's where it gets complicated. Elena left behind a substantial inheritance. Samuel looked up sharply. What kind of inheritance? A trust fund worth approximately $2 million, set up by Roberto for Maya's education and future. The fund was supposed to be administered by Maya's legal guardian until she reached 21. Her grandmother was her legal guardian. Yes, and according to the trust documents, when the grandmother died, guardianship was supposed to pass to Elena's brother, Carlos Vasquez. Patricia pulled out another document. But Carlos had his own problems, gambling debts, a criminal record for fraud. Roberto had specifically excluded him from any contact with Maya in his will. Samuel's mind was racing, trying to piece together the implications. So when Maya's grandmother died, Carlos should have stepped forward to claim guardianship and access to the trust fund. Instead, Maya mysteriously disappeared from the system. No one filed for guardianship, no one claimed the inheritance. The trust fund has been sitting in a bank account, earning interest, waiting for someone to come forward. Until now. Patricia nodded grimly. 3 days ago, Carlos Vasquez and his wife filed a petition with the court claiming that Maya had been missing and that they've been searching for her frantically. They're demanding immediate custody and access to the trust fund. Samuel felt sick. They knew where she was all along. The investigator found evidence that suggests Carlos deliberately allowed Maya to become lost in the system, hoping she would disappear permanently so he could claim the inheritance as her next of kin after a suitable waiting period. That's why she ended up on the streets. They abandoned her intentionally. It appears so. And now that word has gotten out about your adoption proceedings. They've suddenly discovered their deep concern for Maya's welfare. Samuel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the pasture where Maya often played with the horses. She had been out there yesterday evening after the confrontation with Margaret Sinclair and the others, sitting quietly with Buttercup, the report card forgotten in her room. She had asked him later if the visitors were angry because of her, and he had struggled to find words that would reassure her without lying. "What does this mean for the adoption?" he asked. "It complicates everything. Carlos has a biological claim that will be difficult to challenge, especially since he's arguing that Maya was taken from her family without proper legal process. She wasn't taken. She was abandoned. Proving that will be challenging. Carlos will claim he was searching for her, that there was some kind of miscommunication with social services. He'll present himself as the grieving uncle who has finally been reunited with his beloved niece." Samuel turned back to Patricia, his jaw set with determination. "What about Maya's wishes? Doesn't she have any say in this? At 8 years old? The court will consider her preferences, but they won't be decisive. Especially if Carlos can demonstrate he can provide a stable home and proper care, with money that should have been protecting Maya all along." Patricia gathered the papers back into the file. "Samuel, there's something else you need to consider. If this goes to court, Maya's relationship with Roberto will come out. The fact that Roberto was your business partner that you stood to benefit from Roberto's death through the partnership agreements, it's going to look like you had ulterior motives for taking Maya in. Benefit? Roberto's death nearly bankrupted me. I had to buy out his share of the business from his estate at a time when I could barely afford it. That's not how Carlos's attorney will present it. They'll argue that you knew about Maya's inheritance, that you've been grooming her to access the trust fund yourself. The accusation was so outrageous, so far from the truth, that Samuel couldn't immediately find words to respond. The idea that anyone could believe he had taken Maya in for financial gain, rather than genuine care and affection, was both insulting and terrifying. There's more, Patricia continued reluctantly. The investigator found evidence that Carlos has been monitoring the situation for weeks. He knows about your dinner parties, your community standing, the opposition you've faced from people like Margaret Sinclair. His attorney plans to argue that Maya has been subjected to an unstable environment, that she's been used as a prop in your social rehabilitation after Catherine's death. Samuel felt the walls closing in around him. Every act of love, every moment of genuine connection with Maya was being twisted into something sinister and calculated. "What do you recommend?" he asked finally. "We fight. We document everything. Maya's condition when she arrived, her improvement under your care, the neglect she suffered while Carlos allowed her to live on the streets. We get testimony from Dr. Morrison, from Mrs. Rodriguez, from Maya's teachers about her progress and happiness. And Maya? Do we tell her?" Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "That's not a legal question, Samuel. That's a family decision. A family decision." The words highlighted the central irony of their situation. They had become a family in every way that mattered. But legally, Samuel had no more standing than a stranger. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted his brooding. Maya appeared in the doorway of the study, still in her pajamas, her hair tousled from sleep. "Good morning," she said, offering them both a smile that made Samuel's heart ache with its trust and innocence. "Mrs. Rodriguez is making pancakes. She said to tell you breakfast will be ready in 10 minutes. "Thank you, sweetheart," Samuel managed. "We'll be right there." Maya started to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Samuel, are you okay? You look sad." The direct question, asked with such genuine concern, nearly broke Samuel's resolve to protect her from the storm that was gathering around them. "I'm fine. Maya, just some business matters to sort out, grown-up stuff." "Something like that." Maya nodded with the acceptance of a child who had learned that adult concerns were often beyond her control or understanding. "Okay, but if you want to talk about it, I'm a good listener. My grandmama always said I was." After she left, Samuel and Patricia sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Patricia spoke. "She deserves to know, Samuel. Not all the details, but she deserves to understand that there might be challenges ahead. If Carlos succeeds in his petition, she could be taken from here with very little warning." Samuel imagined having to explain to Maya that the uncle who had allowed her to suffer on the streets now wanted to claim her, not out of love, but for access to money she didn't even know existed. He thought about her trust fund, the future Roberto had tried to secure for her, and how it had become a trap that threatened to tear her away from the only stability she had known in months. "How long do we have?" he asked. "The custody hearing is scheduled for next Friday." 6 days. 6 days to prepare for a battle that would determine Maya's future. 6 days to find a way to prove that love and commitment mattered more than blood and money. 6 days to protect the child who had already become his daughter in every way that counted. Samuel looked at the file containing Maya's true history, a story of abandonment disguised as loss, of greed masquerading as grief. Whatever happened in that courtroom, he would not let Maya become a victim of her relatives' manipulation again. "Patricia," he said quietly, "I want you to prepare for every possible argument Carlos might make. I want character witnesses, documentation of Maya's progress, expert testimony about the trauma of removing her from a stable environment. I want everything. Samuel, you need to understand, even with all of that, Carlos has a strong legal position. Biological relationships carry enormous weight in family court. Then we'll have to prove that biology isn't everything. That the family Maya has chosen matters more than the family that abandoned her. As Patricia gathered her files and prepared to leave, Samuel made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. He would tell Maya the truth about her past, about the uncle who was coming to claim her, about the fight ahead. She deserved to know, and more than that, she deserved to have a voice in her own future. The 8-year-old girl who had knocked on his door 2 months ago had been powerless, voiceless, forgotten by everyone who should have protected her. The Maya who lived in his house now was strong, confident, loved. She had found her voice, and Samuel would make sure the court heard it. Samuel's father's will and testament lay open on his desk, beside a stack of legal documents. Its aged paper and formal language a stark contrast to the modern custody petition that threatened to tear his world apart. The will, signed by Thomas Hartwell 30 years ago, contained provisions that Samuel had never fully appreciated until now. Clauses about responsibility, about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, about the true meaning of family. It was Wednesday evening, 2 days before the custody hearing, and Samuel had spent the last hour reading his father's words, while Maya did her homework at the kitchen table under Mrs. Rodriguez's gentle supervision. The house felt charged with anticipation and dread, everyone aware that their carefully constructed life together hung in the balance. The conversation with Maya about her true heritage had been one of the most difficult of Samuel's life. He had waited until Sunday evening, when they were sitting together on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Maya had been sketching Buttercup in her new art book, humming quietly to herself. When Samuel finally found the courage to speak, "Maya, there's something important I need to tell you about your family." She had looked up from her drawing, her expression immediately serious. Maya had learned to read the subtle changes in adult voices that indicated significant news. "About my grandmama, about your grandfather, your mother's father." The conversation that followed had shattered Samuel's heart, even as it filled him with pride for Maya's strength. She had listened without interruption as he explained about Roberto Morrison, about the trust fund, about Carlos Vasquez's sudden interest in claiming custody. Her questions had been thoughtful and direct, revealing an understanding of adult complexities that no 8-year-old should possess. "So he let me be hungry and scared so he could have money?" Maya had asked, her voice small but steady. "It appears that way, yes. And now he wants me back because you want to adopt me." Samuel had chosen his words carefully. "He's claiming he wants you back because he loves you and was looking for you. But the timing suggests his real motivation is the money." Maya had been quiet for a long time, her small fingers absently stroking the silver locket at her throat. Finally, she had asked the question that had been keeping Samuel awake at night. "What happens if the judge says, 'I have to go with him'?" "Then we'll fight that decision. And no matter what happens, Maya, I want you to remember that you are loved, that you have value beyond any amount of money, that you deserve to be with people who truly care about you." The days since that conversation had been a whirlwind of preparation and unexpected support. Dr. Morrison had spent hours documenting Maya's medical and psychological progress, creating a comprehensive record of her improvement under Samuel's care. Mrs. Rodriguez had provided testimony about Maya's daily life, her growing confidence, her sense of security in the Hartwell household. Perhaps most surprisingly, the community that had initially questioned Samuel's decision had begun to rally around them. Word of Carlos Vasquez's abandonment of Maya had spread through Millfield like wildfire, and the revelation that he was now seeking custody for financial gain had sparked outrage among even Samuel's former critics. Margaret Sinclair, of all people, had appeared at Samuel's door Tuesday morning with a folder full of character reference letters she had solicited from community members. "I was wrong," she had said without preamble, her usual composure cracked by genuine emotion. "I watched that child at the church social last Sunday, saw how she interacted with the other children, how she looked at you. That's not a little girl being exploited. That's a daughter who adores her father. The church social had indeed been a turning point. Maya had initially been nervous about attending, worried that people would stare or whisper about her unusual situation. Instead, she had been embraced by the community with a warmth that surprised everyone. The church ladies had fussed over her, the other children had included her in their games, and when Maya had volunteered to help serve refreshments, she had done so with a grace and maturity that impressed even the most skeptical observers. "That uncle of hers," Margaret had continued, "he's been calling around town, asking questions about your finances, about Maya's daily routine. It's clear he's not interested in her welfare. He's conducting surveillance." The character reference letters had been overwhelming in their support. Teachers, neighbors, business associates, even some of Samuel's former critics had written eloquently about the positive changes they had witnessed in both Maya and Samuel since they had become a family, but it was Maya's own letter that had moved Samuel to tears. Written in her careful third-grade handwriting, it was addressed to the judge and spoke with a clarity and honesty that cut through all the legal complexities. "Dear Judge, my name is Maya, and I am 8 years old. I want to tell you about my family. Samuel is not my real dad, but he is my real family. He feeds me every day and helps me with homework and teaches me about horses. Mrs. Rodriguez makes me cookies and hugs me when I'm sad. Dr. Morrison checks my health and brings me books to read. I have my own room and my own bed, and nobody yells at me here. Before I came here, I was hungry and scared all the time. I slept in scary places and didn't know where my next meal was coming from. Samuel saved me. He didn't have to, but he did because he has a good heart. I know my uncle wants me to come live with him, but I don't want to. I want to stay with Samuel forever. He is the best daddy a girl could have, even if we don't have the same blood. Please let me stay with my real family. Love, Maya." Now, as Samuel reviewed the custody petition one final time, he was struck by the calculated nature of Carlos Vasquez's legal strategy. The man had hired expensive attorneys who were painting Samuel as a manipulative predator and Maya as a confused child who had been brainwashed by her captor. They were arguing that Maya's attachment to Samuel was a form of Stockholm syndrome, that she couldn't make rational decisions about her own welfare. The allegations were as insulting as they were baseless. But Samuel understood their legal effectiveness. A wealthy, unmarried man taking in a vulnerable child, especially a child of a different race, would naturally raise questions about motivation and appropriateness. That the child in question turned out to be the heir to a substantial fortune only added credibility to suggestions of ulterior motives. A soft knock on the study door interrupted his brooding. Maya appeared in the doorway, wearing her pajamas and carrying her wooden horse. The carved toy had become her comfort object during times of stress. "I can't sleep," she said simply. "Come here." "Sweetheart." Maya climbed into the leather chair across from his desk, curling up with her legs tucked under her. In the soft lamplight, she looked impossibly young and vulnerable, and Samuel felt a fresh surge of protective rage toward the man who had caused her such unnecessary suffering. "Are you scared about Friday?" Samuel asked gently. Maya nodded. "What if the judge believes my uncle? What if he says I have to go with him?" Samuel set aside the legal documents and focused entirely on Maya. "Then we'll appeal the decision. We'll keep fighting until we find a judge who understands that families aren't just about blood. They're about love and commitment and care. But what if we lose? What if I have to leave here and never see you again?" The question hung in the air between them, stark and terrible in its possibility. Samuel had been asking himself the same thing for days, trying to prepare for a future that would be unbearable to contemplate. "Maya, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, and Samuel saw his own love reflected back at him with an intensity that took his breath away. "No matter what happens on Friday, no matter what any judge says, you will always be my daughter. Always. That's not something a court can take away. But if I have to live with Uncle Carlos, then I'll visit you every chance I get. I'll call you every day. I'll fight every legal battle necessary to stay in your life. And when you turn 18, you can choose where you want to live permanently. Maya was quiet for a moment, absorbing this promise. That's 10 years away. I know it seems like forever. But Maya, I need you to remember something. You survived on your own for weeks before you found me. You're stronger than you know. If we have to be apart for a while, you'll survive that too. And I'll be here waiting for you. I don't want to survive anymore, Maya said, her voice breaking. I want to live. Here with you and Mrs. Rodriguez and Dr. Morrison and Buttercup. I want to be Maya Hartwell and go to school and learn to ride horses and have birthday parties and Christmas mornings and all the things normal families do. Samuel left his chair and knelt beside hers, pulling her into his arms as she began to cry, not the quiet, stoic tears she had shed when she first arrived, but the full-throated sobs of a child who had finally learned it was safe to express her pain. You will have all those things, he promised fiercely. Maybe not immediately, maybe not without a fight, but you will have them. I swear to you on my father's memory, on everything I hold sacred, you will have the life you deserve. As he held her, Samuel's eyes fell on his father's will again, and specifically on the clause that had given him the idea for his final legal strategy. Thomas Hartwell had included specific provisions for the care of children in need who might find themselves without family or resources. The language was archaic, a product of a different era, but it established a legal precedent for the Hartwell family's commitment to protecting vulnerable children. More importantly, the will included instructions for a trust fund of his own, money that Thomas had set aside specifically for acts of charity and mercy in keeping with Christian values. Samuel had never touched that money, had barely thought about it in the years since his father's death. But now he saw it as a weapon in their legal battle. If Carlos Vasquez wanted to fight over money, Samuel would show the court that Maya's financial security was never in question. He had the means to provide for her education, her future, her every need, and unlike Carlos, he had no interest in controlling or accessing any inheritance that rightfully belonged to her. Maya, he said softly, I want you to know that whatever happens on Friday, I've made arrangements to ensure you'll be taken care of. There's money set aside for your education, for whatever you might need as you grow up. That's separate from your mother's trust fund. It's my gift to you with no strings attached. Maya pulled back to look at him. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. Because that's what fathers do for their daughters. We make sure they have every opportunity to build whatever life they choose, even if I can't live here anymore. Even then, you'll always be provided for, Maya. That's a promise. As they sat together in the quiet study, surrounded by legal documents and family history, Samuel felt a strange sense of peace settling over him. Whatever happened in that courtroom, he had done everything in his power to protect Maya and secure her future. The rest was beyond his control, a reality that was both terrifying and oddly liberating. Can I stay here with you tonight? Maya asked. I don't want to be alone. Samuel gathered her up in his arms and carried her to the large leather sofa by the window. As they settled together under an old quilt that had belonged to his mother, Maya curled against his side with the complete trust of a child who knew she was loved. Samuel, she whispered in the darkness. Yes, sweetheart. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for saving me too. Outside, the Texas night stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, while inside the Hartwell house, a father and daughter held each other close. Against whatever tomorrow might bring, the Millfield County Courthouse buzzed with an energy that Judge Rebecca Chen had rarely experienced. In her 15 years on the bench, word of the custody hearing had spread throughout the community, and the gallery was packed with observers, supporters of Samuel Hartwell on one side, a smaller group of Carlos Vasquez's allies on the other, and a substantial number of curious onlookers drawn by the unusual circumstances of the case. Maya sat between Samuel and Patricia Vance at the petitioner's table, her small hands folded carefully in her lap. Her best dress, a navy blue one that Mrs. Rodriguez had purchased specifically for the hearing, pressed and spotless. In her pocket, she carried the letter she had written to the judge. its careful words representing her own voice in a process that would determine her future. Across the aisle, Carlos Vasquez cut an impressive figure in his expensive suit, his graying hair neatly trimmed, his expression appropriately grave. Beside him sat his wife, Maria, a thin woman with nervous eyes who kept glancing toward Maya with what might have been guilt or calculation. Their attorney, David Sterling, was a prominent family law specialist from Austin, whose reputation for aggressive tactics preceded him. Judge Chen called the court to order and reviewed the basic facts of the case. A custody dispute between biological relatives and a prospective adoptive parent, complicated by allegations of abandonment, financial manipulation, and questions about the child's best interests. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, "You may present your client's case." Sterling rose with the confidence of a man accustomed to winning. "Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about family, about a little girl who was separated from her loving relatives through a series of tragic misunderstandings and who now deserves to be reunited with her biological family." He painted Carlos Vasquez as a grieving uncle who had been searching frantically for his missing niece, delayed only by bureaucratic obstacles and miscommunications with social services. According to Sterling's narrative, Maya had been taken in by Samuel Hartwell before proper family notifications could be made, creating an illegal custody arrangement that had prevented her reunion with her rightful guardians. Mr. Vasquez and his wife have prepared a loving home for Maya, Sterling continued. They have stable employment, strong community ties, and most importantly, they represent continuity with Maya's cultural heritage and biological family connections. Sterling carefully avoided mentioning the trust fund directly, instead focusing on Maya's need for proper family guidance and her supposed confusion about her living situation. He presented several character witnesses who testified to Carlos's good character and financial stability. Though their testimony felt rehearsed and hollow, when it came time for cross-examination, Patricia Vance was surgical in her questioning. "Mr. Vasquez," she began, "when exactly did you first attempt to locate Maya after her grandmother's death?" Carlos shifted uncomfortably. "Immediately. We contacted social services right away. According to the records, your first contact with social services was 3 days ago when you learned about Mr. Hartwell's adoption petition. That was nearly 7 months after your sister-in-law's death. There were complications. What kind of complications prevented you from looking for an 8-year-old child for 7 months? Sterling objected, but Judge Chen allowed the question. Carlos's explanation about bureaucratic delays and lost paperwork sounded increasingly implausible under Patricia's relentless questioning. "Mr. Vasquez, are you aware that Maya was living on the streets for approximately 3 weeks before coming to Mr. Hartwell's home? I was told she was in temporary foster care. She was sleeping in abandoned buildings and searching for food in restaurant dumpsters. During that time, did you contact any local shelters, churches, or community organizations to ask about a missing 8-year-old girl? We trusted the system to take care of her. The same system you claim failed to notify you of her grandmother's death?" When Patricia finished her cross-examination, Carlos Vasquez's credibility lay in tatters. His wife fared even worse, breaking down under questioning and admitting that they had made no effort to locate Maya until they learned about the trust fund. The defense portion of the hearing was a powerful contrast. Dr. Morrison testified about Maya's physical and emotional transformation, presenting medical records that documented significant improvement in her health, nutrition, and psychological well-being. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke movingly about Maya's daily life at the ranch. Her growing confidence, her academic achievements, Margaret Sinclair's testimony surprised everyone with its passion. "I was wrong about Samuel's decision," she admitted. "I thought he was acting impulsively, perhaps unwisely. But I've watched Maya blossom under his care. I've seen her go from a frightened, hungry child to a confident, happy little girl who knows she's loved." Teacher after teacher testified about Maya's academic progress, her social adjustment, her obvious sense of security. Even some of Samuel's former critics spoke on his behalf, their testimonies creating a powerful portrait of a man who had genuinely transformed a child's life through selfless commitment. When Judge Chen asked if Maya wished to address the court, the 8-year-old stood with quiet dignity and approached the witness stand. The courtroom fell silent as she was sworn in, her small voice clear and steady as she promised to tell the truth. "Maya," Judge Chen said gently, "do you understand why we're here today?" "Yes, ma'am. You have to decide where I should live. Can you tell me about your life before you came to live with Mr. Hartwell?" Maya's testimony was devastating in its simplicity. She spoke about her grandmother's death, about the confusing days that followed when no one seemed to know what to do with her, about the gradual realization that she was truly alone in the world. "I got scared when the food ran out," she said, her voice never wavering. "I tried to be brave like my grandmama taught me, but I was so hungry. I slept in an old building that smelled bad, and I was afraid of the noises at night." "What happened when you went to Mr. Hartwell's house?" Maya's face lit up with remembrance. "He invited me to dinner. Real dinner, at a big table with nice people. And when I told him I didn't have anywhere to go, he said I could stay. How do you feel about living there?" "Safe," Maya said immediately. "I feel safe and loved and like I belong somewhere. Samuel teaches me things and helps with my homework. Mrs. Rodriguez makes me favorite foods and hugs me when I'm sad. Dr. Morrison makes sure I'm healthy and brings me books. It's like having a real family." Judge Chen glanced toward Carlos Vasquez before continuing. "Maya, your uncle says he loves you and wants to take care of you. How do you feel about that?" Maya was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her words carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "I don't remember my uncle. Judge Chen, I don't remember him ever visiting or calling or sending birthday cards. When my grandmama died and I didn't have anywhere to go, he didn't come looking for me. Samuel did." She paused, her small hands gripping the wooden rail of the witness stand. "I know families are supposed to be about blood, but I think they're really about love. And I love Samuel, and he loves me. We're already a family." As Maya returned to her seat, not a single person in the courtroom doubted who this little girl considered her real family to be. Judge Chen called for a brief recess after Maya's testimony, and the courtroom emptied into the hallway where supporters clustered around Samuel and Maya, while Carlos Vasquez's group huddled with their attorney near the far wall. Samuel knelt beside Maya's chair, smoothing her hair and whispering words of encouragement, while Patricia reviewed her notes one final time. "You did beautifully up there," Samuel told Maya quietly. "I'm so proud of how brave you were. Did I say the right things?" Maya asked, her confidence wavering slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "You spoke from your heart. That's always right." When court reconvened, Judge Chen's expression was unreadable as she shuffled through the papers before her. The judge's final ruling document, the official paper that would determine Maya's future, lay blank and waiting for her decision. "This case," Judge Chen began, "presents a complex intersection of legal principles, biological relationships, and most importantly, the best interests of a child. I've listened carefully to all testimony and reviewed the extensive documentation presented by both sides." She paused, her gaze moving between the two tables. "Mr. Vasquez, while I acknowledge your biological relationship to Maya, I am deeply troubled by the timeline of your involvement in her life. Your failure to locate or claim this child for 7 months, during which time she suffered significant hardship, suggests a lack of genuine commitment to her welfare." Carlos Vasquez's face flushed red, but his attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the evidence suggests that your interest in claiming custody coincided directly with your discovery of Maya's trust fund, raising serious questions about your motivations." Judge Chen turned her attention to Samuel. "Mr. Hartwell, your decision to take Maya into your home was legally problematic. You should have contacted social services immediately. However, the evidence clearly demonstrates that your actions were motivated by genuine concern for a child in desperate need." Samuel felt his heart pounding as he waited for the judgment that would determine their future. The medical testimony shows remarkable improvement in Maya's physical and emotional health under Mr. Hartwell's care. The educational records demonstrate significant academic progress. Character witnesses from across the community paint a picture of a child who has found stability, love, and genuine family connection. Maya slipped her small hand into Samuel's, and he squeezed it gently, drawing strength from her trust. Most importantly, Judge Chen said, looking directly at Maya, "I have listened to this young lady express her own wishes with remarkable clarity and maturity. While children's preferences are not controlling in custody decisions, they are certainly relevant, especially when expressed as thoughtfully as Maya has done today." The judge picked up her pen and began writing on the ruling document. After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony, this court finds that the best interests of Maya Vasquez would be served by remaining in the care of Samuel Hartwell. A collective gasp rose from the gallery, followed by whispered celebrations from Samuel's supporters. Maya's eyes went wide with disbelief, then filled with tears of joy. "Mr. Vasquez's petition for custody is denied," Judge Chen continued firmly. "Mr. Hartwell's petition for emergency guardianship is granted, with full adoption proceedings to commence immediately." Carlos Vasquez shot to his feet, his composure finally cracking. "This is outrageous. She's my family. You can't just give her to some stranger." "Mr. Vasquez," Judge Chen said with steel in her voice, "you forfeited any claim to family relationship when you abandoned this child to the streets. Family is not merely about shared DNA, it's about commitment, sacrifice, and love. Maya has found her family, and this court will not disrupt that bond." She signed the ruling document with decisive strokes, the official seal making their victory legally binding. "Maya Vasquez, effective immediately. You are the legal daughter of Samuel Hartwell, with all the rights and protections that entails." Samuel felt his legs go weak with relief and joy. Maya launched herself into his arms, and he held her tight while she sobbed against his shoulder, tears of happiness, of relief, of finally belonging somewhere permanently. "We did it," she whispered through her tears. "We're really a family now." "We were always a family," Samuel replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "Now it's just official." The courtroom erupted in celebration as friends and supporters surrounded them. Dr. Morrison was crying openly. Mrs. Rodriguez was crossing herself and murmuring prayers of thanksgiving in Spanish. And even Margaret Sinclair was dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. As the crowd began to disperse, Judge Chen approached Samuel privately. "Mr. Hartwell, I want you to know that in 30 years of family law, I have rarely seen a more clear-cut case of a child knowing where she belongs. You've given that little girl something precious, the knowledge that she matters, that she's worthy of love and protection. She gave me something too. Your Honor, she gave me purpose. That evening, the Hartwell Ranch hosted an impromptu celebration that drew what seemed like half the county. The house filled with neighbors, friends, teachers, and community members who came to congratulate the newly official family. Maya moved through the crowd like a small queen, accepting hugs and congratulations with the poise of someone who finally understood her own worth. Mrs. Rodriguez had outdone herself with the food, preparing enough to feed an army, while Samuel found himself shaking hands and accepting backslaps from men who had questioned his judgment just weeks earlier. The transformation in community support was complete. Maya had won over even the most skeptical hearts with her grace and authenticity. As the evening wound down and the last guest departed, Samuel and Maya sat together on the front porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the warm darkness. Maya wore her new bracelet, a gift from Dr. Morrison engraved with Maya Hartwell and the date of her adoption, and couldn't stop looking at it. Dad, Maya said, testing out the word that was now officially hers to use. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything, sweetheart. Do you think my mama and grandmama would be happy about today?" Samuel considered the question seriously. "I think they would be overjoyed to know that you're loved and safe and have a family that will never let you face the world alone." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "I think so too. And I think they would like you. I hope so. I would have liked to meet them. They sat in comfortable silence, father and daughter, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, the whisper of wind through mesquite trees, the distant call of a barn owl. It was the sound of home, of belonging, of a future stretching ahead, filled with possibilities. "Dad?" Maya said sleepily, her head resting against Samuel's shoulder. "Yes, Maya. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for knocking on my door." As they sat together under the vast Texas sky, the legal document that made their family official tucked safely away in Patricia's briefcase, Samuel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A hungry child seeking help, a lonely man finding purpose, a community learning about the true meaning of family. It was a story that would be told in Millfield for generations to come. Maya Hartwell was finally, officially, permanently home. 6 months after the adoption became final, Maya Hartwell stood before her classroom's science fair display with the quiet confidence of a child who had learned to trust in her own abilities. Her project on horse behavior and intelligence had earned a blue ribbon, and she wore it proudly as she explained her research to visitors touring the school. At nearly 9 years old, Maya had grown taller and stronger, her face fuller, her eyes bright with the security that came from knowing she belonged somewhere permanently. "Maya's project is exceptional," her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, told Samuel as they watched Maya demonstrate how horses communicated through body language. "She's testing at a 6th grade level in reading and 5th grade in mathematics. We're recommending her for the gifted program next year." Samuel felt the familiar swell of pride that had become a constant companion in his new role as a father. Watching Maya thrive academically, socially, and emotionally had been one of life's greatest gifts, made all the more precious by his knowledge of where she had started. "She works hard," Samuel replied, though he knew it was more than that. Maya had an intellectual curiosity that seemed to grow stronger each day, fed by the security of knowing that her questions would be answered, her interests supported, her future protected. The science fair was just the latest in a series of milestones that marked their life together. There had been Maya's first day at Millfield Elementary as an official student, her first piano recital at the community center, her first blue ribbon at the county fair for her drawing of Buttercup. Each achievement was celebrated not just by Samuel, but by their extended family of friends and neighbors who had become invested in Maya's success. Mrs. Rodriguez had become the grandmother Maya had never really known, teaching her to cook traditional Mexican dishes while sharing stories about her own children and grandchildren. Dr. Morrison continued as both pediatrician and family friend, bringing books and art supplies and serving as a role model for Maya's growing interest in science and medicine. Even Margaret Sinclair had become an unlikely ally, involving Maya in historical society activities and praising her help with the annual charity auction. The transformation in community acceptance had been complete. Maya was no longer the abandoned child who had been taken in by Samuel Hartwell. She was simply Maya Hartwell, a bright, kind, accomplished little girl who happened to have found her family in an unconventional way. The new family photograph on Samuel's desk told the story of their journey together. Taken at Christmas, it showed Samuel and Maya in front of the decorated tree in their living room, both wearing matching red sweaters that Mrs. Rodriguez had insisted upon. Maya's smile was radiant, her arms wrapped around Samuel's neck, while his expression showed the contentment of a man who had found his purpose. The formal portraits that had once graced his desk, pictures of business achievements and social events, had been replaced by candid shots of their daily life. Maya on Buttercup, the two of them building a treehouse, Maya helping with the cattle, family dinners around the kitchen table. The business of ranching continued, but it was no longer the sole focus of Samuel's life. He had restructured his operations to allow more time for Maya's activities, and had discovered that fatherhood had made him a better manager, more focused and efficient during working hours because he had something more important waiting for him at home. The legal battles with Carlos Vasquez had ended definitively. After losing the custody case, Carlos had attempted to challenge the adoption through appeals, but each effort had been rejected by higher courts. Eventually, faced with mounting legal bills and no prospect of success, he had disappeared from their lives as suddenly as he had entered them. Maya's trust fund remained safely managed by the bank, growing steadily toward her future while playing no role in their present happiness. "Dad," Maya said, running up to them with her blue ribbon still pinned to her dress. "Mrs. Patterson says the county newspaper wants to interview me about my project." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. What do you think about that?" Maya considered the question seriously, as she did most things. "I think it would be good to share what I learned about horses. Maybe other kids would want to study them too." Samuel marveled, not for the first time, at Maya's maturity and thoughtfulness. The traumatized child who had knocked on his door 10 months ago had grown into a confident young lady who understood that knowledge was meant to be shared. That success carried with it the responsibility to help others. As they drove home from the science fair, Maya chattering excitedly about her day, Samuel reflected on the ways his life had changed. The house that had felt too large and too quiet now rang with laughter and conversation. The dining room that had hosted stiff dinner parties now saw daily homework sessions and art projects. The ranch that had been his sole legacy now served as a classroom where Maya learned about responsibility, hard work, and the satisfaction that came from caring for other living creatures. "Dad," Maya said, as they turned into their driveway, "can we invite Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Rodriguez for dinner Sunday? I want to show Dr. Morrison my new books, and Mrs. Rodriguez promised to teach me how to make tamales." "Of course we can. This is your home too, Maya. You can invite whoever you want." "I know," Maya said with the casual confidence of a child who had never doubted her welcome. "I just like asking. It makes me feel like I'm helping to take care of our family too, their family." The phrase still filled Samuel with wonder. He had set out to help one abandoned child and had instead discovered that she was the missing piece of his own life. Maya had given him purpose beyond profit, joy beyond achievement, love beyond anything he had imagined possible. As they pulled up to the house, Samuel saw Mrs. Rodriguez waiting on the porch with glasses of lemonade and a plate of cookies, their usual after-school ritual. The simple domestic scene filled him with contentment that wealth and business success had never provided. "Maya," he said as they got out of the truck, "do you remember what you said to me that first night? About feeling useful?" "Yes," she said, gathering her school backpack and science fair materials. "I want you to know that you've made me feel useful too. Before you came along, I had everything a man could want, but I didn't have anything that truly mattered. You gave me that." Maya looked up at him with those serious dark eyes that could still stop his heart with their depth and wisdom. "We saved each other, didn't we?" "Yes, sweetheart, we did." As they walked up the porch steps together, Samuel thought about his father's journal, about the words that had guided his decision to invite a hungry child to his table. Thomas Hartwell had written about kindness echoing through generations, about the responsibility that came with blessing, about the true measure of a man's worth. Samuel finally understood what his father had meant. The act of kindness that had begun with a simple dinner invitation had indeed echoed through generations, not just in the life Samuel had given Maya, but in the life she would build for herself and, perhaps someday, for children of her own. The legacy of the Hartwell family was no longer just land and cattle and accumulated wealth. It was love freely given, trust carefully nurtured, and the knowledge that family was not about blood or law, but about choice and commitment, and the courage to open your heart to someone who needs what you have to offer. That evening, as Samuel tucked Maya into bed and listened to her prayers, which now included gratitude for family, friends, horses, science projects, and Dad, who saved me and loves me, he knew that his father would have been proud, not of the ranch or the business success, but of this, a man who had learned that the greatest wealth was measured not in dollars, but in the trust of a child who called him Dad. Maya Hartwell slept peacefully in her room, surrounded by ribbons and certificates and photos of the life she had built through courage, intelligence, and the simple act of knocking on a stranger's door. And Samuel Hartwell, devoted father and forever changed by love, sat in his study reading to prepare for tomorrow's homeschool lessons, grateful beyond measure for the unexpected gift that had transformed them both.